The attic door slams shut. My mother's voice cuts through the dust like a blade. "What are you hiding, Caleb?" My fingers tremble around the Stanford letter, the ink still fresh, the truth burning in my chest. She forged my rejection. She's been drugging me, and the man in the alley just proved she'll do worse. I have one chance to run before she realizes I know. The crate pins his arm, his phone in my hand, the screen glowing with the name of my sedative. 30 seconds until she checks the ledger. 20 until she finds me gone. 10 until she calls him back. The pills in my pocket aren't for anxiety. They're for control. And I just stopped taking them. Dust motes danced in the shafts of gray light piercing the attic's cracked shingles. Caleb gripped the edge of a mildewed cedar chest, his knuckles white against the dark wood. He pried the lid open, releasing a scent of mothballs and damp paper. Beneath a stack of yellowed lace curtains sat a heavy cream envelope. The Stanford crest glared upward, pristine despite the surrounding decay. His thumb traced the jagged line where the seal had been breached years ago. Inside, the acceptance letter hummed with a life he thought had been denied him. Tucked behind it, a carbon copy of a rejection notice bore his name. The signature at the bottom mimicked his own loops and slants, yet the ink bled with a heavy-handed pressure he never used. Martha's signature. Caleb's chest tightened as the floorboards creaked downstairs. Martha's humming drifted through the vents, a rhythmic, domestic sound. He realized in that moment that his entire existence in Oakhaven was a construction, a cage built by the woman who claimed to be his protector. The letter was dated 4 years ago, the exact time his nervous breakdown supposedly began. He wasn't sick. He was intercepted. The heat in the attic became a physical weight, 105 degrees of stagnant air that made his skin slick. He folded the letter, the paper crisp and sharp against his trembling palm. Downstairs, the chime of a silver bell rang twice. Ting-ting. Martha was calling. She didn't know he had found the cash. She didn't know the simple boy had just discovered his stolen future. Caleb descended the stairs, counting each one to keep the world from tilting. 1, 2, 3. By the time he reached the kitchen, his pulse was a steady drumming in his ears. Martha stood by the stove, her sharp, bobbed hair perfectly in place. She didn't look up, but her voice was a syrup-thick trap. "There we are," she murmured, her back to him. "We've been hiding in the dust again, haven't we? It makes the head so cloudy, Caleb. You know what the doctor says about overexertion." He didn't answer. He couldn't. He just watched her hand reach for the silver bell on the counter, her fingers resting on it with a predatory grace. Later that afternoon, the rusted swings of Miller's Park groaned under the weight of a biting wind. Caleb sat on the cold iron seat, his fingers tracing the links of the chain. The metal bit into his skin, a grounding pain. Mr. Higgins huddled in his wool coat, his eyes darting toward the tree line as if the very oaks were Martha's spies. "Your mother had a bonfire 3 summers ago," Higgins rasped, his breath blooming in the frigid air like white ghosts. He pushed his thick, oversized glasses up the bridge of his nose with a trembling finger. "Behind the garden shed, I saw the Stanford return address curling in the embers, Caleb." She watched those envelopes blacken like she was protecting a secret. I wanted to say something, but, well, my daddy always said, a quiet mouse escapes the owl. Caleb gripped the iron chain harder. "Why mention this now, Arthur, after 4 years of watching me rot?" The old man spat into the dirt, the sound sharp in the quiet park. "Guilt is a heavy coat to wear in winter, son. And I see the way she looks at you. like you're a piece of furniture she's afraid might walk out the door. Caleb stared at the flickering street lamps. The neighborhood he once viewed as a sanctuary now shriveled into a cage, the bars forged by a mother's quiet, desperate hands. Every episode he'd had, every moment of confusion, now felt like a manufactured symptom. He wasn't losing his mind. He was being erased. The walk back to the Miller house felt longer than usual. Caleb tracked his progress by the cracks in the sidewalk. 42, 43. As he turned the corner into the alley behind the family store, the shadows seemed to stretch and thicken. The smell of rotting peaches from the store's dumpster cloyed at his throat. A figure stepped out from behind a stack of wooden pallets. It was Miller, a local debt collector Martha kept on a short leash. He was a man of thick neck and sour sweat, his knuckles scarred from years of negotiations. "Caleb," Miller grunted, blocking the path. "Your mama says you've been wandering. Says you're getting flighty again. She's worried, kid. And when she's worried, I get busy." He stepped forward, his heavy boots crunching on broken glass. He reached out to grab Caleb's shoulder, his hand like a meat hook. "Maybe you need a reminder of why it's safer inside." Caleb didn't freeze this time. The anger from the attic, the heat of the stolen letter, surged through him. As Miller lunged, Caleb pivoted, grabbing a heavy plastic crate from the stack. With a grunt of effort, he swung it low, catching Miller's shins. The man went down with a muffled curse, his arm caught between the crate and the brick wall. Caleb didn't stop to think. He saw the smartphone slide out of Miller's pocket and onto the damp pavement. He snatched it up, the screen glowing with a notification. New message. Martha Miller. He sprinted. He didn't count the steps this time. He just ran until his lungs burned and the metallic scent of his own sweat filled his nose. He ducked into the crawlspace beneath the back porch, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He swiped the screen of the stolen phone. It wasn't locked. The message from his mother read, "Make sure he's too tired to argue tonight. Triple the blue ones in his tea." Caleb's stomach turned. He opened the web browser with shaking fingers, typing in the markings of the vitamins Martha gave him every morning at 8 a.m. The results scrolled up, a list of side effects that mirrored his life. Extreme lethargy, memory loss, blurred reality, compliance. Asterisk, he wasn't sick. He was being chemically shackled. The blue ones weren't medicine. They were the bars of his cell. The kitchen light was a harsh, clinical white when Caleb entered. Martha was waiting, 2 porcelain cups of tea already steaming on the table. The scent of chamomile was undercut by something sharp, something clinical. "You're late, Caleb," she said, her voice a low, rhythmic melody. She straightened her silk blouse, her eyes scanning his face for any sign of the rebellion he was hiding. "We've had a long day. We need our rest. Sit, darling. Drink." Caleb sat. The wood of the chair felt unnervingly solid. He looked at the tea, the surface of the liquid shimmering. "I sold the Volvo today," Martha said casually, as if she were mentioning the weather. She picked up her spoon and stirred her own tea, the silver clinking against the rim. Clink, clink, clink. "The medical bills from your last incident at the hospital. They've become quite a burden. And since you aren't well enough to drive anyway, it seemed the only logical step." Caleb felt the air leave the room. The car was his only way out of Oak Haven. Without it, he was 20 miles from the nearest bus station with no way to bridge the gap. "You sold my car," he whispered. "I protected our future." She corrected, leaning in. She placed her hand on his forearm, her grip surprisingly heavy. "I'm the only thing standing between you and the dark, Caleb. Without me, you'd dissolve. Now, drink your tea. It's getting cold." He stared into the amber liquid. He knew if he drank it, the fog would return. The numbers would slip away, and he would become the broken boy she wanted him to be. He reached for the cup, his fingers brushing hers, and felt the cold, hard reality of her control. That night, the house felt like a living thing, breathing through the vents. Caleb waited until the rhythmic humming from Martha's room stopped. He crept to the garage, his bare feet silent on the cold concrete. He reached for his mountain bike, the one thing Martha hadn't sold yet. His hand met empty air where the tires should have been firm. He knelt, feeling the jagged, sliced rubber. Both tires had been shredded, the inner tubes hanging out like entrails. He stood up, his breath hitching. He ran to the wall where the landline entered the house. The gray wire had been shorn clean, the copper innards glinting in the moonlight. He was cut off. No car, no bike, no phone. He retreated to his room, his mind racing. 1, 2, 3. He needed to anchor himself. He looked at the wall where a small framed photo of his father usually hung. It was gone. In its place was a massive, looming oil painting of Robert Miller that usually hung in the study. His father's eyes seemed to follow him, filled with a silent, trapped warning. Then he heard it. Thump, thump, thump. It was coming from beneath the floorboards. A heavy, rhythmic sound, like someone dropping a sandbag over and over. It echoed through the house, vibrating in Caleb's very bones. He opened his door and looked into the hallway. Martha stood at the far end, framed by the moonlight. She was holding her silver bell, but she wasn't ringing it. She was just smiling, a cold, empty expression that didn't reach her eyes. "Do you hear that, Caleb?" she whispered. "It's just the house settling. Or perhaps it's your mind playing tricks again. It's so hard to tell the difference when you're this tired, isn't it?" The storm broke at midnight. Thunder shook the shingles, and rain lashed against the glass like 1,000 frantic fingers. Caleb knew he couldn't wait for morning. He pushed his window up, the wood groaning in protest. The wind whipped his hair, smelling of wet asphalt and ozone. He climbed onto the ledge, his fingers gripping the grit of the roof. The shingles were slick, a dangerous, rubbery slope. He began to crawl toward the drainage pipe, his heart a frantic drum in his chest. "Going somewhere, kid?" A hand grabbed Caleb's ankle. He slipped, his chin slamming into the roof. He looked back to see Silas, Martha's handyman, looming over him. Silas was a mountain of a man, his bull neck disappearing into a dark raincoat. He cracked his knuckles, pop, pop, pop. A rhythmic sequence that made Caleb's skin crawl. "Your mama said you might try to take a walk," Silas rumbled, his voice barely audible over the wind. He held a crowbar in his right hand, the cold steel glinting when the lightning flashed. "She's real worried about you catching a cold, or a fall." Silas lunged. Caleb rolled to the side, his fingers scrabbling for purchase on the wet roof. The crowbar slammed into the shingles where his head had been a second before, sending a spray of grit into the air. Subverted. Caleb knew he couldn't outrun Silas on the ground, but the roof was his territory. He had spent summers up here as a child, mapping the slopes. He scrambled toward the chimney, his movements calculated and quick. Silas followed, his heavy boots slipping on the wet surface. "Just come back inside, Caleb," Silas shouted. "Don't make this harder." Caleb reached the peak of the roof. He saw the sturdy branch of the old oak tree swaying just 4 feet away. It was a logical leap, the only way down that didn't involve the drainage pipe Silas was now guarding. He took a deep breath, calculated the distance, and jumped. His hands caught the rough bark. He felt a surge of triumph. He was a scholarship athlete once. His body remembered the strength his mother had tried to drug out of him. He swung his legs, hooking them over the branch. He looked back at the roof, seeing Silas standing helplessly at the edge. "I'm out, Silas," Caleb yelled over the thunder. "Tell her I'm gone." He began to climb down the trunk, his movements sure and steady. He reached the lower branches, only 6 feet from the ground. He dropped, landing in the soft, muddy mulch of the garden. He was free. He had outsmarted the guard, conquered the height, and now he just had to reach the pharmacy in town to get help. He sprinted toward the gate, his heart soaring with the first taste of victory he'd felt in years. He reached the town square in 10 minutes, his clothes soaked and clinging to his frame. The neon sign of Evans Pharmacy flickered in the rain, a beacon of safety. He pounded on the glass door. Inside, Richard Evans, the pharmacist, looked up from a stack of ledgers. He saw Caleb and hurried to the door, unlocking it with a series of clicks. "Caleb, my God, boy, you're half drowned," Richard said, pulling him inside. The air smelled sharply of rubbing alcohol and peppermint. Richard grabbed a towel and draped it over Caleb's shoulders. "What on earth happened?" "I need a phone, Richard," Caleb gasped, his voice cracking. "My mother, she's drugging me. I found the letters. She's been keeping me here. I need to call the state police." Richard paused. He reached up and straightened his silk tie, his fingers moving in a practiced 3-stroke motion. Caleb froze. He recognized that gesture. It was the same one Dr. Reed used before a lie. "Drugged? Caleb, that's a very serious accusation," Richard said, his voice dropping into a soothing, clinical tone. He didn't move toward the phone. Instead, he moved toward the counter, blocking the path to the back office. "You know your mother only wants what's best for you. You've been having these episodes, the paranoia." "It's not paranoia. I have the phone. I have the messages." Caleb reached into his pocket, but his hand came up empty. He must have dropped Miller's phone during the struggle on the roof. Richard sighed, a sound of weary disappointment. "Your mother called me, Caleb. She said you were spiraling. She was so upset. She's on her way here now with Silas." Caleb backed away, his wet sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. "You're her cousin. You're the one giving her the pills. I'm the one keeping you stable," Richard snapped, the mask of the kindly pharmacist slipping. "Do you have any idea how much work it takes to keep this town running smoothly? To keep people like you from making a scene? Your father understood. He paid for the silence. And now your mother pays. It's a family business, Caleb, and you're the primary asset." The door behind Caleb opened. The bell chimed, a cheerful, mocking sound. Martha stepped in, her umbrella dripping on the pristine floor. Silas stood behind her, his face bruised from the roof, his knuckles white as he gripped the handle of the door. "There we are," Martha whispered. "We've had our little adventure, haven't we? Now, it's time to go home. We have an anniversary to prepare for." Caleb was led back to the house, a prisoner in the back of Silas's truck. The rain had turned into a dull drizzle, and the town of Oakhaven looked like a watercolor painting left out in the sun, blurred, fading, and false. When they arrived, the house was transformed. Long tables had been set up in the dining room, covered in white linen that looked like burial shrouds. Martha's anniversary dinner was no longer a private affair. She had invited the mayor, the sheriff, and Dr. Reed. "Tonight," Martha announced to the small crowd of guests as they arrived, "we celebrate the memory of Robert, and we face the difficult reality of our dear Caleb's declining health. It's a heavy burden. But as a mother, I must be the one to carry it. Caleb sat in the corner, his hands trembling. He saw the papers on the sideboard, legal documents with gold seals, power of attorney, permanent guardianship. She was going to use this dinner to publicly execute his autonomy. He looked around the room. Every face was a mask of practiced sympathy. They all knew. The mayor sipping his scotch, the sheriff leaning against the doorframe, Dr. Reed adjusting his tie. They were all part of the ledger. A knock at the door broke the tension. Mr. Higgins stood there, his wool coat dripping. He looked small and frail against the opulence of the room. "I'm here for the boy," Higgins said, his voice surprisingly steady. Martha laughed, a sharp, metallic sound. "Arthur, you're not on the guest list. Caleb is tired. He's going to his room." "No," Higgins said, stepping into the foyer. He looked at Caleb, his eyes magnified and watery behind his glasses. "My daddy always said, a man who stands for nothing will fall for anything. I've been falling for a long time, Martha. But tonight, I'm standing." He looked at Caleb. "The car is running, son. The back gate is open. If we move now, we can be in Chicago by dawn. They don't have a ledger there?" Caleb didn't hesitate. He lunged past Silas, who was distracted by a tray of hors d'oeuvres. He grabbed Higgins's hand, and they bolted into the night. They reached Higgins' battered sedan just as the porch lights of the Miller house flared to life. The engine roared, a beautiful mechanical scream. "We're going to make it, Arthur," Caleb said, his heart pounding. "We're really going to make it." They sped toward the edge of town, the headlights cutting through the fog. The bridge was the only way out, a high steel structure over the churning river. But as they rounded the final bend, Caleb saw the flashing yellow lights. A line of orange cones blocked the entrance. A construction sign stood in the middle of the road. And standing next to it was Silas, holding a heavy flashlight, surrounded by 3 other men in work vests. "They blocked the bridge," Higgins whispered, his foot hitting the brake. They knew. A black SUV pulled up behind them, its high beams blinding. Martha stepped out. She wasn't wearing her syrupy smile anymore. In her hand, she held a heavy tire iron, the metal dull and cold. She walked to the driver's side window and smashed it. The glass exploded inward, a rain of diamonds covering Higgins. "Out," she hissed. "Get out of the car, Caleb." Caleb stepped out, his boots sinking into the red clay of the roadside ditch. He looked at his mother, seeing the monster beneath the silk and pearls. "Why?" he asked, his voice a raw whisper. "Why do all of this? You could have just let me go to school. You could have been free of me. And lose the trust?" Martha laughed, and the sound was more terrifying than the storm. "Your father was a fool, Caleb. He left everything to you, locked away in a vault I couldn't touch unless you were incapacitated. He thought he was protecting you from me. He didn't realize he was just giving me a reason to keep you forever." She stepped closer, the tire iron swinging at her side. Caleb lunged, grabbing her wrists. They struggled in the mud, the scent of wet earth filling his nose. For a moment, he had the upper hand. He twisted the metal from her grip, his muscles screaming. He held the tire iron high, ready to strike, ready to end the years of poisoning and lies. But then he looked into her eyes. He saw the woman who had tucked him in, the woman who had baked the pies, the woman who was the only world he had known for 22 years. The conditioning held. His arms went weak. He couldn't do it. Martha saw the hesitation. She spat in his face and shoved him back. Silas stepped forward, the barrel of a handgun glinting in the moonlight. "In the ditch, kid," Silas said. Caleb fell back into the tall, dead grass. He lay there, looking up at the gray sky as his mother stood over him like a victor. "The inheritance is almost gone, anyway," she said, her voice turning cold and businesslike. "Building the hospital wing, buying the sheriff. It's expensive to keep a secret this big. But tomorrow, the papers will be signed. You'll go to the state facility in Blackwood, and I'll finally have the peace I deserve." The anniversary dinner was a blur of shadows and the smell of expensive perfume. Caleb sat at the head of the table, his wrists bound with plastic zip ties beneath the tablecloth. He had been injected with something heavy. His head felt like it was filled with wet wool. Martha stood, raising a crystal flute of champagne. "To Robert," she toasted, "and to the strength it takes to do what is necessary." Caleb looked at the wall. An exposed wire hummed near the baseboard, a fault in the store's old electrical system he had noticed months ago. He shifted his weight, his fingers fumbling with a sharp piece of a broken oyster shell he'd palmed from his plate. He sawed at the plastic. 1, 2, 3. The ties snapped. He didn't run. He reached out and grabbed the exposed wire, using the silver fork from his setting to bridge the gap to the metal frame of the table. There was a blinding flash, a pop like a gunshot. The lights died. The fire suppression system, triggered by the surge, began to hiss, raining cold, chemical-smelling water onto the guests. Screams erupted in the darkness. Caleb moved. He knew the layout of the store by heart. 12 steps to the office, 5 steps to the PA system. He reached the desk and fumbled for the smartphone he'd hidden there, the one he'd snatched from the debt collector and stashed before Silas caught him. He plugged it into the auxiliary port of the store's sound system. He hit play. Martha's voice boomed through the darkened store, amplified by the heavy speakers. "Cody, make sure he's too tired to argue. Triple the blue ones. The inheritance is almost gone. I'm the only one who knows how Robert really died." The room went silent, save for the hiss of the sprinklers. The guests stood frozen in the artificial rain, listening to the confession of the woman they had spent years protecting. Subverted. Caleb felt a surge of relief. This was it. The smoking gun. The town would have to act now. The sheriff was standing right there. The mayor was listening. He stepped out of the office, expecting to see the authorities moving toward his mother. "Sheriff," Caleb shouted. "You heard her. Arrest her." The sheriff wiped water from his eyes. He looked at Martha, then back at Caleb. He didn't reach for his handcuffs. Instead, he reached for his radio. "Dispatch," the sheriff said, his voice calm and terrifying. "We have a situation at the Miller house. The boy has had a violent break. He's hallucinating, playing some kind of forged audio. Send an ambulance and 2 more units for containment. He's dangerous." Caleb's heart dropped. The truth didn't matter. The ledger was too deep. The sheriff wasn't a witness. He was a co-conspirator. "It's not forged," Caleb screamed. "You all heard it." "We heard a sick boy crying for help," Dr. Reed said, stepping forward, his silk tie ruined by the water. "Don't worry, Martha. We'll have him in the van in 5 minutes. It's for his own safety." Martha smiled. It was a slow, triumphant expression. She had won. Even with the truth echoing in the air, the walls of Oakhaven were too thick to breach. But then, a new sound cut through the chaos. A siren. Not the local police, the high-pitched, multi-tonal wail of the state troopers. Blue and red lights strobed against the windows, reflecting off the wet pavement outside. A tall, broad-shouldered officer stepped through the door, his Stetson pulled low. Officer James Taylor. "I received an anonymous tip," Taylor said, his voice a cold blade. He held a notepad in one hand, the one he used to copy his wife's grocery lists. And I've been sitting in the parking lot for 20 minutes listening to your PA system, Mrs. Miller. I don't care who owns this town. I don't live here. He looked at the sheriff. Drop the radio, Bill. State oversight is here, and we've been recording the whole thing. The collapse was swift. As the state police moved in, the pillars of the community crumbled. Richard Evans was found with his hands in the sink, washing them for the 10th time that hour, while the troopers seized his ledgers. Dr. Reed tried to reach for his tie, but the handcuffs were already clicking shut. Caleb stood in the center of the room as the smoke from the short circuit cleared. He watched as Silas was led out, his head bowed. He watched as Martha was escorted to a cruiser, her silk dress stained and her hair matted. She didn't look at him. She looked at the ground, her power stripped away by a man who didn't care about her name. Caleb walked to the sideboard and picked up the Stanford letter. It was damp, but the ink was still clear. The sun rose over the Chicago skyline, a pale, cold gold. Caleb sat in a booth at a 24-hour diner, the smell of burnt coffee and grease a welcome change from the sterile scents of Oakhaven. He laid the letter on the Formica table. He picked up the payphone, a real, physical object that connected to a world that didn't know his name. "Hello?" a voice answered. "Stanford admissions." Caleb took a breath. He didn't count his steps. He didn't check his pulse. He just looked out the window at the endless stream of cars, each one a life, each one a choice. "My name is Caleb Miller," he said, his voice firm and clear. "I believe you have a place for me." He hung up and took a bite of his eggs. They were cold, and the coffee was bitter. But for the first time in 4 years, he could taste the truth. He was no longer a symptom. He was a man, and the road ahead was wide, terrifying, and completely his own.